Good evening, namaste, and vanakkam to one and all present here. I'm Adira Nair, your host for the evening and part of Professional Helps, welcoming Dr. Mridula Parameshwar and all the attendees to our 14th episode of Professional Helps. And our topic for the evening is an overview on root canal treatment. Our speaker for the evening is Dr. Mridula Parameshwaran, MDS in Conservative Dentistry and Endodontics. She's an assistant professor at Government Dental College, Alapura. She will be discussing about root canal treatment, its procedures, protocols, and restorations. Extreme sensitivity that lingers and radiates to the head, unbearable pain, huge pockets on the tooth which attract food, causing irritation and pain were all treated previously by extraction. But extraction which reduces the functionality of the teeth and the jaw, thereby compromising on health and aesthetics. The advent of root canal treatment solved all these symptoms. Our attendees have posed questions regarding RCT, ma'am. With your permission, I will give in those.
Yeah, sure. Okay, and thank you.
The first question goes so: what are the different diagnostic tests for RCT?
Okay, so just before going to that, I will just give a brief introduction, especially for the medical students who are attending here. So, what does the term endodontics mean? So, actually, the word endodontics it came from the Greek word endo means inside, and odont which means the tooth. So, inside the tooth. So, we are mainly dealing with the pulp and the periapical tissues here, an endodontist. Okay. So, before moving on to the diagnostic procedures, I will just want to share about the rationale of doing such a treatment. Why you want to do a root canal treatment, and how does doing a root canal treatment, that is confining our cleaning and shaping and filling within the canal, how does it help to heal the periapical lesion that is present? So that is the rationale of what you're doing. So according to Fish actually he introduced in 1939, he introduced four zones as you can see. The first zone is a zone of necrosis or the infection. That is the only zone you can see from the slide. It is the only zone that is present within the root canal. That is at the apex. Okay, apical 2 to 3 millimeter. Here is the only zone where bacteria, that is the actual microorganisms that are causing the endodontic infections, that is the main culprits are residing here. And all the other zones, that is outer zone, which is a zone of contamination, zone of irritation and stimulation, is essentially free of microorganisms and is actually the body's reaction to the toxins that is produced by the microorganisms which are residing inside the root canal. So as you move on further away from the apex, the toxins are getting diluted. So further on the outermost portion, the irritant, that is the toxins, are actually acting as a stimulant. So there actually you can see signs of repair and regenerations like new bond formation, angiogenesis, everything. So once you remove the nidus of the infection, which is present inside the root canal, apical 2 to 3 millimeter, then what is happening is you are removing the microorganisms and the culprits. Subsequently, the toxins are getting removed, and the body's defense mechanism will take care of the external lesion, that is the periapical lesion. So that is what is happening in an RCT. Now moving on to the question that Adira asked, that is the diagnostic procedures. See, the most important symptom, the most and the very most important symptom that drives a patient to an endodontist is pain. Most of the dental students may be knowing that. That is pain. So first and foremost is the careful case history. That is the chief complaint, history of presenting complaint. That is when did the pain start or the swelling start, whatever. And the next most important is the pain history. That is you have to ask about the pain history. So what all you should ask? One is the quality of the pain. That is how is the pain? Like what type of pain is it? Is it a short, sharp, momentary, piercing type of pain, which is likely to be a pulpal pain? Or is it a dull or diffuse kind of pain, which is most probably a periodontal or maybe a non-odontogenic pain? Then how long does it last? Where is the location? See, it is a tricky question because it is a pulpal pain. Most of the cases in the early stages, the patient won't be able to localize the tooth. He won't be able to tell you like which tooth is having pain. Only in the later stages of pulpitis and once the pulp becomes necrotic and involving the periapical structures, does the patient know where the pain is actually. So most cases you will be dealing with a case of preferred pain. Like if it is an upper tooth, a maxillary tooth, the patient will be complaining of a severe headache, especially while lying down. When if it is in the lower molar, like mandibular molars, pain that is radiating to the chin and to the ear. So that is regarding the location of the pain. Then the duration, how long does it last? Then onset, when does the pain start? Like most of the cases, the pulpal pain starts in the early stages while you drink cold water. They will be telling you, I am having severe pain while I'm taking ice cream or cold drinks. And sometimes in the later stages, heat is also acting as an aggravating factor. Then another aggravating factor is when you lie down, the pain tends to increase because of the increase in pulpal pressure. The pain tends to increase by change in posture. Then relieving factors, like if the patient is coming to you with a can of ice cold water stuck to his chin, most probably the patient is having an acute symptomatic irreversible pulpitis. Here, heat is aggravating and cold tends to relieve the pain. So that is a relieving factor. Then a careful medical history. There are certain conditions that can complicate or actually alter the treatment plan of endodontic therapy. So you have to ask about the medical history and of course the dental history, whether the patient has had any past root canal treatments, therapies, or any other endodontic therapy or dental therapy. That is also important, especially when you're dealing with allergies. Like we want to know the patient had a previous administration of local anesthesia and all. So that is the importance of case history. Then the major diagnostic criteria. First is reversible pulpitis. That is when the patient is telling you, I am having severe pain while drinking water. Just after that, I am completely normal. So it is pain on applying stimulus, usually cold and or sweets, and it ceases, completely stops on removal of the stimulus. That is reversible pulpitis. Here you just want to remove the etiology. You don't have to go for the invasive or the actual root canal treatment when the problem is reversible pulpitis. And if it moves to the next stage, that is irreversible, it is an exaggerated response to stimulus like hot or cold, and that lingers even after removal of the stimulus, and there will be spontaneous pain. That is a very important finding. That is, even in the absence of stimulus, the patient is getting pain. Like once a patient is lying down, suddenly he gets pain, and out of sleep, he just jumps out of the sleep. That is a case of spontaneous pain. It is characteristic feature of irreversible pulpitis. It is a definitive indication for root canal therapy. Next is necrotic pulp. In the necrotic pulp, the patient will not be having much symptoms or maybe slight dull pain on chewing. That will be the only symptom that the patient might be having. So, and the only indication will be a discolored tooth. So, patient's only complaint might be a discolored tooth and there will be a past history of trauma or a carious tooth. Okay, and earlier they may be having a pain history, and later on the patient will tell you that after some months the pain just subsided by its own. So, now the pulp has got necrotic. That's why. And in this case, you can often see periapical pathologies also. Radiolucencies you can find in the radiographs. So that is about necrotic pulp. And after the stage, it becomes the periapical involvement. Like it will go to the next stage. That is, it will go out of the root canal and move on to the periapical region. There will be getting periapical pathologies like periapical granuloma, abscess, cyst, etc. Now, the clinical examination. So, after getting a careful history regarding especially the pain history or the history of swelling, then the extraoral examinations. So, extraoral examination will begin just when the patient is walking to the clinic. The examination starting there from the gait, the agony in the patient's face, everything will tell you about the possible diagnosis. Okay. Then look for facial asymmetry, then swelling, then if there is any signs of cellulitis or local rise in temperature, that is systemic involvement, then you have to palpate the lymph nodes. Tender and palpable lymph nodes is present. Then some extraoral sinus tract, especially in the chin region. Okay, so all these are indicators of regarding the location and condition of the endodontic condition of the patient. Next comes the intraoral examination. So here we have to examine the degree of mouth opening. Usually it is 2 to 3 millimeter, 2 to 3 finger width. Mouth opening should be there ideally. So if it is less than that, you can suspect a trismus. Like the trismus can occur due to a variety of reasons. So you have to rule out a TMJ problem, or whether if it is due to some pericoronitis, or if it is actually due to a referred pain that patient is unable or apprehensive about opening. So all this you have to see. Now the inspection. Inspection is very important. You have to see the intraoral structures, the buccal mucous membrane, tongue, everything you have to inspect thoroughly. You have to look for any other lesions. And why inspection is important? In certain cases, it can actually tell you about your diagnosis as well. So in case of if it is a gingival abscess or a periodontal abscess or a periapical abscess, you can actually distinguish it from the location of the lesion. as you can see on the slide. So if it is more towards the, the pregingival margin, it is most likely, or it's located just lateral or the buccal aspect, it is usually a periodontal abscess, usually more towards the gingival margin, pregingival margin. But in periapical abscess, it is more towards the periapex or towards the end of the root, the apical area of the root. Now, palpation, you have to palpate, especially if the patient is able to localize the pain, then palpation becomes more important there. You can just palpate the area and see if there is any swelling. If there is a fluctuant swelling that is pointed, definitely the treatment is you have to do an incision and drainage to relieve the pain. So gently palpate because it is a very sensitive issue. Dental pain is intolerable. So don't you have to do it very carefully. Okay. And palpation of the periapical tissues using very light digital pressure to see whether the lesion is indurated, it is fluctuant, diffuse, the location, extent, everything you can assess from the palpation step. Now is the percussion test. See, percussion is very, very important in endodontic therapy on diagnosis. Actually, it gives you an idea about the periodontium, that is the attachment apparatus, the area that is anchoring the tooth to the gums, that is the attachment apparatus or the periodontium. I'm explaining this for the medico students who are present here. So what you have to do is, it will give you an idea about the condition, whether the attachment apparatus or the periodontium is inflamed or not. So there are two types of percussions. One is lateral percussion and vertical percussion. And first and foremost, you don't percuss the tooth just when the patient comes to you in severe pain. Don't press it or percuss it using a blunt instrument in the first step. You use a light digital pressure first with gloved hands. Okay. And after which you can maybe go on to the next step, like using a blunt end of the mouth mirror handle to percuss. And you can do it two ways. The first is vertical percussion. So if the tooth is sensitive to vertical percussion, most likely reason is there is a periapical pathology or there is an apical periodontitis. And if it is sensitive to lateral percussion, that you can see in the next picture, that is the lateral percussion. So it will be that the diagnosis is mostly periodontal origin. The pain will be mostly periodontal, most likely to be periodontal origin. You cannot, it need not be always like that, but most likely to be periodontal. Okay. This is a subjective test actually. It is not objective. So it again depends upon the threshold, pain threshold of the patient and the apprehension. Everything will count on. Next is the mobility test. This is again, we are assessing the status of the periodontial mobility test. You have to just use two fingers and test the mobility, or maybe you can use the blunt end of a mouth mirror. Two mouth mirrors you can use to assess the mobility, and we have a grading system for mobility, so to assess the periodontal status. Now bite test. This is also very, very important in endodontic diagnosis. Sometimes there may be a cracked tooth. See, many of you will be aware of a cracked tooth or maybe a fractured tooth. So you have to know whether there is a cracked tooth. So then you have to use a bite test. The patient will be telling that I am having pain while releasing the bite. When I choose something hard or sticky, when I relieve the bite, I'm getting sudden pain. It is called a rebound phenomenon or a rebound pain. So that is most likely to be because of a cracked tooth or a fracture that is extending more nearer to the pulp. To assess that, either you can ask the patient to bite on a piece of cotton roll or orange wood sticks are available. Then what you are seeing here is an instrument called tooth sleuth. This instrument is having a point at a wedge-shaped tip is there, and you can just place it onto each cusp of the tooth, especially when you're doing it on molars or premolars, posteriors. It is very easy to assess, like the patient will correctly able to locate the pain when the biting force falls on a particular cusp. So we can, it helps in diagnosis that there is something problematic with that particular cusp. So that is the, advantage of using a tooth sleuth. Now, coming on to radiographic examination, I would say that without a radiograph, an endodontist will not be able to complete his therapy, especially a root canal therapy. So it is the best companion of an endodontist. It is a good radiograph. Good intraoral radiograph is mandatory for endodontic diagnosis. So what all you can assess from a radiograph? You can assess the location or the extent of caries, any restorations that were placed earlier, then fractures, then root canal treatment, whether the patient had undergone any root canal treatment for the particular tooth or the tooth in question. previous restorations, then assessment of the pulp cavity, which is very important. That is, if you are dealing with what is the there is any calcifications in the pulp chamber or any pulp stones, whether the canal is patent, whether you can see the radiolucency of the canal completely, or is there any obstructions in it, whether the canal is calcified, the status of the periradicular tissues, the periodontal status, and also the bond pattern. So everything you will be getting an idea from a good radiograph. Okay. See, here you can see in the first picture, you can see a slide, a small radiolucent line, and over that there is a slide, a white radio opaque. That is a white radio opaque line that is moving around the, I mean, you can see around the root radicular portion. That is the lamina dura. So this lamina dura is very helpful in diagnostic. So loss of lamina dura, it is often the first indication that the tooth is having some periapical or periapical pathology issues has started. So that is the loss of lamina dura. Here in the second picture, you can assess the loss of lamina dura in that tooth. In the premolar tooth, the lamina dura is missing. You can compare it with the first picture. Here in the third picture, you can see that there is a deep rustration that is present. There is a periapical pathology that is present on the mesial root of the first molar. Here, there is a deep rustration that is rusting on the pulp. See, another thing is the periapical radiolucency after completing a root canal therapy. See, here it is a root-filled tooth with a periapical pathology. So everything you can assess from all these things you can assess from a radiograph, and sometimes you may have to go for one or more radiographs, especially if you want to see any missed canals or curved canals, like additional canals and all. You may have to go for and two radiographs, two or more radiographs in different angulations. You may have to depend on that also. Now moving on to a very another important companion for the endodontist, that is the pulp vitality test. So you can divide the pulp vitality test into two types. Like one is the neural sensibility test and the actual vitality test. So earlier they were called the pulp vitality test as such, but now they have been reclassified into neural sensibility test and pulp vitality test. Why? Because the neural sensibility test, we are just assessing the the viability of actual sensory nerve fibers which are present inside the pulp, whether the sensory fibers are still viable or they are able to respond to a stimulus or not. And depending upon the variations in the response, we are going to, we are able to diagnose the lesion. So that is neural sensibility test. So here the vitality means here you have to assess the blood flow to the pulp. So here we are not assessing the blood flow. We are just assessing whether viable nerve fibers are still present or not. So that is the neural sensibility test. In that, the first test is the thermal test. Thermal test can be either cold test or heat test. Here you apply immense amount of cold to the tooth in question. Tooth in question means never do the test directly onto the tooth in question. You have to come to the tooth in question in the last step only. So if you are dealing with a maxillary central incisor, right maxillary central incisor, you have to first go from the opposite side, that is the contralateral canine, then the lateral incisor, then again the adjacent maxillary incisor, then the opposite, the contralateral canine, then the lateral incisor, and finally only you will come to the tooth in question. That is, you have to first check the contralateral and adjacent teeth to the tooth in question and come to the tooth in question only at last. That is how you do any neural sensibility test. Then only you can assess the difference. Okay. So first is the cold test. The materials used are, one is a spray with cold air. That is the simplest of all. Like we use a three-way syringe for a blast of cold air. Then what you can do is ethyl chloride, frozen carbon dioxide, or dry ice. Dry ice is especially important when you're dealing with a tooth with a crown, because it is having an extremely low temperature, like minus 90, 56 to minus 98 degrees Celsius. So if you're going to deal with a tooth with a full coverage restoration or a crown, you may not be able to place it directly. So in that case, you can go for a dry ice, so that you get a response. Then ice sticks, then ento ice, 1112 tetrafluoroethane. So all this. So in a cold test, actually, I had to tell you earlier, there are two types of nociceptors in the pulp. One is the A delta fibers, and the second is the C fibers. So these are the major nociceptors, that is the pain causing fibers, the sensory fibers which are present in the pulp are the A delta and the C fibers. So C fibers, they are located in the core, they are more towards the core of the pulp. So the initial response in the earliest stages of pulpitis, what is getting excited is the A delta fibers. So that is giving the sharp momentary type of pain, which is characteristic of pulpal pain. So in most of the neural sensibility tests, we are exciting the A delta fibers, we are the viable A delta fibers. In the later stages, while it is in the later stages, like moving on to the later stages of irreversible pulpitis, or maybe towards when the pulp is starting to get necrotic, the C fibers will start getting, they are more likely to respond in that case, because they can resist hypoxia to some extent, and they are responsible for a dull and diffuse pain, more continuous dull and diffuse type of pain. So cold test actually is stimulating the A delta fibers in the pulp. Then heat fibers. So heat fibers in the early stages of pulpitis, in the early stages of irreversible pulpitis or irreversible pulpitis, the heat test won't give you much response. Only in the later stages, the heat test will give you an aggravated response, especially when you're dealing with a symptomatic acute irreversible pulpitis. The heat will actually aggravate the condition. So it will cause severe pain to the patient. In the early stages, heat test won't be of much help. So here what all we can use is warm air, then coffee hot water. That is around 65 degrees Celsius. So if you are going to use coffee hot water, you have to isolate the tooth using a rubber dam. Otherwise, even while doing cold test also, it is best to isolate the tooth using a rubber dam, and you place the dry ice or the spray, the cold spray onto a piece of cotton pellet, and you apply onto the tooth, onto the facial surface. And what you get is, you will get a like the normal response is that you will get a transient, a mild pain, which just goes off when you remove the stimulus. That is a normal response to the pulp. Okay, we will come to that. And if it is pulpitis, the pain will be very short, sharp, and piercing type of pain. The patient sometimes will jump out of the chair. So it will be that much immense pain will be there, especially in cases of irreversible pulpitis and all. Okay. So this is heat test. Heat test, you can use laser beam for that. Then the frictional heat from rotated rubber polishing disc, hot burnisher compounds, warm air, everything you can use for a heat test. And heat test mostly stimulates the C fibers. That's why I told in the later stages of pulpitis, you will get more response from the heat test. Now the electric pulp test or EPT. So electric pulp test, we are giving a very small electrical stimulation in gradations to the tooth, so that the tooth normally responds. So there will be a rheostat. You can control the amount of current that is coming. So usually the tooth will respond in 0 to 2. That range the tooth will be responding. So if it is above, I mean, even less than that, the moment you apply, the patient is just jumping out. So that means that there is something abnormal about it. So here also A delta fibers is getting stimulated initially. But if the current is more, you need to get more current to get a response. Here C fibers may also get excited. So then maybe you are dealing with a necrotic pulp. If you are getting a very faint response, or it will take more current to get a response. Okay. So here what we give is a small electrical stimulation. So there will be a lip clip and also an electrode which have to be coated using an electrolyte. What you usually use is a toothpaste as an electrolyte. So you can see a cotton pellet there. You have to isolate the tooth so that saliva is not present. The tooth should be completely dry to get a correct response. So now, how will you grade the response? So normal pulp, it is a transient mild pain which subsides within 1 to 2 seconds of removal of the stimulus. If it is reversible, it is a strong momentary pain, but again, within seconds on removal of the stimulus, the patient will be normal again. That is reversible. If it is irreversible pulpitis, okay, then that is moderate to strong response, very, very strong response. And sometimes it lingers even after you remove the stimulus. Even after you remove the stimulus, the patient will be still sitting like that. So that means you are dealing with a case of irreversible pulpitis. And in necrotic pulp tissue, or when a periapical pathology has set in, most commonly you will get a negative pulp response, that you won't get any response at all. Okay, so that is how you do the grading. Now moving on to the next test, that is the Anesthetic test. Anesthetic test means, as I told you earlier, the pulpal pain is very difficult to localize. The patient will not be able to tell you which tooth, especially in the earlier stages. So if other tests, all the other tests have failed and you are not able to find out which tooth is having pain, then you may go for an anesthetic test. That is, you have to anesthetize each tooth in the quadrant. Another important feature of the pulpal pain is that it never crosses the midline. It will not cross the midline. So if it is on the right, you have to check the lower, and if you are not able to find out whether it is on the lower teeth or in the upper teeth, but you just sure not to cross to the left. If it is on the right, means the right teeth is the culprit. Then you can do an anesthetic test. We have to anesthetize one tooth at a time. You have to anesthetize one tooth, and starting from the posterior boss tooth, you have to start. And here, what is giving is, either you can give, the best method is to give an intraligamentary injection. Even if you give a subperiosteal infiltration, the next tooth may get anesthetized. But intraligamentary means you anesthetize each tooth at one point. Like you have to start from the if it is upper tooth, you have to start from the maxillary third molar if present, or from the maxillary second molar, then maxillary first molar. Like that, you have to move towards the anterior region. And if not, you have to move, if you have excluded the upper teeth, you can move on to the lower teeth. That is the anesthetic test to localize the pain. Next is actually a very invasive type of diagnostic measure. I will not recommend that. It is very invasive in the sense it is the last resort. If all the other tests have failed, if you still cannot localize, what you can do is you can use a test cavity. Like the tooth in question, you can just, using a round burr, you can prepare a small cavity in that without giving local anesthesia. So what they're telling is, if the tooth is vital, if there are viable nerve fibers in it, the patient will feel pain once you reach the DEJ, that is the dentino-enamel junction, then you just restore it. Okay. Otherwise, you go on continuing the drilling and you can end up in a root canal treatment. That is a test cavity. It's the last resort if all the other things fail. Now the actual pulp vitality test. So this actual test, in the sense, here we are assessing the blood flow to the pulp, whether there is any actual arterial blood flow is still present in the pulp. So there are many types of pulp vitality tests, but because of the time constraint, I have just included two. One is laser Doppler flowmetry. Laser Doppler flowmetry, we make use of helium neon laser. Here we assess the velocity of the RBCs. Okay, so this velocity of the RBCs, that is Doppler shifted using the Doppler phenomenon. The light that contacts a moving object is Doppler shifted. So because of the depending on the velocity, the signal will change accordingly, making use of the Doppler phenomenon. So in a stagnant region, the signal will be feeble, so that you can assess that the pulp vitality is less. And if it is a vital tooth, the signal will be more strong. So that is a laser Doppler flowmetry. So this is the equipment. I have personally not done this, so I'm not able to comment more about this. But it is a very revolutionary, diagnostic criteria. Aid. This is pulse oximetry. Pulse oximetry, we are measuring the oxygen saturation, percentage of oxygen saturation. Here we use red and infrared light emitting diodes we are using. So the absorbency characteristics of the hemoglobin to red and infrared light is being assessed here. So if it is more like actual arterial blood means, so the amount of oxygen saturation will be more. So like that, you assess the vitality using pulse oximetry. So this, you can see here, the pulse oximetry sensor is present on the patient tooth, pulse oximetry monitor, and the sensor. So these are the different diagnostic measures. Adira.
Thank you, ma'am. Moving on, how many dental visits do patient need to complete an RCT?
In most cases, RCT needs 2 or 3 visits. But in certain cases, you can complete the treatment in a single visit. Okay, that is called single visit endodontist. endodontics. So most of the endodontists, they are apprehensive about completing the RCT in a single visit, because what we are intending to do here is we have to disinfect and we have to give an ideal intracanal medicament to control the infection. So all that is not possible with a single visit. So it is best if you go at least a 2 visits. You have to give uh, time for giving an intracanal medicament in it, so that in the next appointment you can obturate, that is fill the root canal. So usually it is 2 visits, or in sometimes maybe 2 or 3 visits, or even more than that, especially if you are dealing with a weeping canal. You know what is a weeping canal? Weeping canal means the exudation is not stopping, it's still coming on. So you have to stop until, I mean, you have to continue the intracanal medicament till the exudation has stopped. The canal is dry, then only it is ready for obturation. So there are certain conditions in which you can consider single visit endodontics. So I will just see that. First is single visit endodontics. We will first see the indications. When all can we do a single visit endodontics? Especially in certain cases of intentional RCT, like as a part of a prosthetic appliance or something, or in a vital tooth. If a recent trauma case, the tooth is vital, but vital means it is fractured. It is fractured, and there is no other way but to place a post or something, and you have to give a crown for the patient. So it is an uncomplicated vital tooth, then we can complete it in a single visit. Okay, in a single visit, you can complete it. Then again, fractured anterior teeth, that is aesthetically very compromised, especially young patient, and fractured anterior tooth, you just have to complete it and get a crown as soon as possible. So then you can, if there are no other complications or periapical pathologies associated with it, then you can go for a single visit RCT. Then again, non-vital teeth with a sinus tract. So if there is a sinus tract, there is a possibility for drainage to occur if there is a patent sinus tract present. So in that case, even if the tooth is non-vital, maybe you can complete it in a single visit. But I will not personally encourage it. In a non-vital teeth with sinus tract, there is definite, there is definite infection present. That is why a sinus tract is there and a pus drainage is there. So it is better that you complete it in 2 or more visits by giving a chance for an intracanal medicament to act. Next is the patients requiring sedation. Like if the patient is so apprehensive, you have to keep for sedation or sedatives. The patient has to take pre-medications with benzodiazepines or something. In such cases, it is better to complete it in 1 visit. Why bother the patient again? Then patients requiring antibiotic prophylaxis. In certain conditions, the patients need antibiotic prophylaxis. So the patient has taken the medication, has come to you, so the patient may need to take it again in the next visit. So it is better that you complete it in the first visit if there are no other complications like a periapical pathology. Then physically compromised patients, like who cannot often come to you for a visit. So in such cases also you can complete it. You can consider completing it in a single visit. Then there are absolute contraindications like teeth with anatomical abnormalities. You have to negotiate it, like anatomical abnormalities in the sense of severe dilaceration, severely curved roots and all. Never attempt to do that in a single visit. The patient has to keep his mouth open for hours. So if at all you are going to do a single visit endodontics, you should be able to complete it within 1 hour, not more than that. So if you are confident that you can complete it within 1 hour and there are no other complications, go for it. Then acute apical periodontitis. Acute apical periodontitis means that there is severe pain and periodontal inflammation is there. Patient has come to you with severe pain. Never go for single visit. And non-vital teeth without sinus tract. Retreatment cases. In retreatment cases, the problem is the condition will be very refractory to the normal treatment. Refractory. Okay, that is why you have already done a RCT. Again, the patient is having problems. So there is, you need to give an intracanal medicament. So never go for a single visit RCT in such cases. Then acute abscess with pus drainage, active pus drainage, and patients with TMJ disorders, because the patient cannot keep the mouth open for that much time. So in these cases, always refrain from doing a single visit endodontics. Mostly, it is better to complete it in 2 or 3 visits, in my opinion. Adira.
Thank you, ma'am. Next question. What are the major steps during an RCT?
Okay, the first and foremost step is after you have arrived at a diagnosis, everything, you have to ask a proper history. If there are no allergy conditions, nothing is there, first you administer the local anesthesia. Okay, for maxillary teeth, you have to give, it is better to give a supraperiosteal infiltration. I mean, infiltration anesthesia will suffice in maxillary teeth, just a supraperiosteal injection. And if you're doing with if you're going to do a mandibular molar till the mandibular anteriors, you mostly what we give is an inferior injection. Inferior nerve block is what you give. And the most common local anesthetic that you use is lignocaine. Lignocaine, that is 2% lignocaine in 1 lakh adrenaline as the vasoconstrictor. That is what you use. So you administer the local anesthetics, you assess the patient, and once you assess the anesthesia, you can keep isolate the tooth using a rubber dam. Rubber dam isolation is also mandatory. Then I will just, this is a very big topic. So I have just made it into a capsule. So there are many steps that I have omitted. Okay. So this is just the overview. The first is the access cavity. First and foremost is the access cavity. Then you do the cleaning and shaping. In that comes the working length determination, the instrumentation, and the irrigation. Finally, the obturation or the filling. So we will just see each steps in detail. See here, you can see a carious tooth with an abscess. The first step is the access opening. It is given. Second step, you are instrumenting the canal. The length is getting determined. In the third step, the canal is widened and cleaned. Canals are getting filled. That is obturated and reinforcement using a post-endodontic restoration. So why you need an access cavity? See, access cavity is the only way by which you can actually go or instrument or access the nidus of the infection. In the first slide, I already discussed about the nidus, which is at the apical 2 to 3 millimeter of the root canal. So you want to go, you want to do the cleaning and shaping, your irrigants, medicaments, everything should reach that nidus, which is the apical 2 to 3 mm. So to reach that nidus, we have to have a good access. So a straight line access to the nidus. That is the primary objective. Okay, to the nidus. Next is to remove all the caries, then to conserve the sound tooth structure. So at the same time, you have to conserve the sound tooth structure as well. Because while doing the endodontic therapy, the patient is relieved of pain, but the tooth has to stay there now. It has to remain functional. So you have to conserve the remaining tooth structure as much. Then to complete deroof the pulp chamber. So deroof the pulp chamber means, see, just imagine a big box, okay, a box. So just the pulp chamber is just like that. It has got a lid and a big cardboard box, you see. So the lid, and that lid is called the roof. That is the roof of the pulp chamber. So once you access the pulp, do the access opening, you are creating the first opening on the roof. Once you do the first opening or get the first drop off effect, it's just like the burr tends to fall into a cavity, just like that a feeling will come when you are doing it using the dental burr. Most of the dental students may be knowing that it's a dropping off effect or a loss of resistance will feel once you penetrate that lid. So once you get the drop off effect, then you do not go down. Then if you are going down, you're going to end up in a perforation. From there, once you get the drop off effect, you move laterally so that you remove the entire lid. That is called deroofing. I hope you understood. Okay, so that is called deroofing. So you are removing the entire lid of the chamber and you are opening it so that you are seeing what is inside. And in the floor of the chamber will be the root canal orifices. And the orifices are that will take you to the root canals. Through the orifices, you can get into the root canal. So that is what is access cavity preparations. So to locate all the root canal orifices, to remove all the coronal and pulp tissue. So while doing this, the coronal pulp tissue which is present inside the chamber, that is within the box, there is a lot of pulp tissue that is present. That is the coronal pulp tissue. You remove everything and then only you are able to locate what is inside. That is the orifices are present inside. It's just like a box. The chamber is just like a box. Then to achieve a straight or direct line access to the apical foramen. The apical foramen is the largest opening at the apex of the root. The largest opening is the major diameter. It is the point from where the blood vessels, everything will enter into the pulp. That is the apical foramen. So you have to get an access to the apex through the access opening. Then to establish restorative margins to minimize marginal leakage. That is, once you do the access opening, you have to ensure that the tooth is restorable and you can give a good post-endodontic restoration, a crown over that. Okay, you should not destruct the whole crown and do a good RCT. After that, the tooth should remain functional. Okay, so you should conserve the remaining tooth structure and do the access opening. So this is how an opened access will look like. Here in the upper slide, what you can see is a access in a maxillary molar tooth with three canals. Actually, it is having a one more canal here. Second MB2 will also be there. So this is a, what you are seeing here is the rubber dam clamp. So this is access opening in a maxillary molar tooth. Second one is a mandibular molar tooth with four canals. See, I just told you it is just like a box. You have removed the lid and this is what you see. Once you remove all the coronal pulp in the pulp chamber, this is what you see here. And usually the canals are located in the floor wall junction and the pulp chamber floor. This is the pulp chamber floor. Here you can see lines radiating through the pulp chamber floor. That is the see, they are the fusion lines. So usually the canals are present at the terminations of the fusion line. So there are several laws regarding location of canals. I'm not going into that details. So all that will help in or aid you in locating the canal orifices. So this is what an actual access opening looks like. Moving on to the, once you did the access opening, so it is called access is success. So once you do a good access opening, you have done half your job. Okay. Next comes the cleaning and shaping. So why you need to clean and shape? Here what you're seeing is the longitudinal section of an opened tooth. So the primary objective is we have to remove all the infected necrotic pulp tissue inside, the soft as well as hard tissue. And we have to give space for the irrigants to access the apical canal space, and also to help to gain space for the delivery of medicaments. And you should shape the canal accordingly so that you can seal it with a good obturating material. Okay. And retain the integrity. At the same time, you should retain the integrity of the radicular structures. Like we should not, instrument too much, and you should not weaken the tooth. So that should be kept in mind while cleaning and shaping. So the first step in cleaning and shaping is working length determination. See, from where you should start and where the cleaning and shaping should end. That is the working length determination. So it is the distance from the coronal reference point. Here you can see what this is. This instrument is called an endodontic file. It has got a stopper in it. This is a stopper. This is a rubber stopper in it. So that is the coronal reference point. So the distance from the coronal reference point to the point where all the manipulation should end. You should never go beyond that. Okay, all the instrumentation, your irrigation and obturation, everything should end at this point. So that point, till that point, so the distance from the coronal working, coronal reference point to the point where all the instrumentation, irrigation and obturation should end is called the working length. So everything should be confined within the working length. It should not be less or should not be more than that. So why usually it is 0.5 to 1 millimeter short of the radiographic apex. Radiographic apex in the sense you have to take a good intraoral radiograph, and you assess the length of the tooth from the coronal reference point to the apex of the tooth, and usually it is 0.5 to 1 millimeter. There are several methods to determine that. Here you can see what you are seeing here is the anatomy of the tooth apex. It will look like this. Here this is the major opening, which is compared to a morning glory flower. See, it has got a major opening. There is a major diameter, the apical foramen. This is the point from where the blood vessels are entering the pulp. But you should never instrument till the apical foramen. If you are instrumenting to the apical foramen, you will end up in extrusion of the debris, irritation of the periapical tissue, and severe endodontic flare-ups. We will be discussing about that later. Okay. So the instrumentation should never go till the apical foramen. You have to make sure that the foramen is patent, but instrumentation, irrigation, obturation should never go till the apical foramen. But it should be stopping here. This is the minor diameter. This is usually 0.5 to 1 mm short of the apical foramen. No hard and fast rules usually. Okay. This is called the apical constriction or the minor diameter. So this is the point that roughly corresponds to a histological landmark called the cementodentinal junction or the CDJ. The cementodentinal junction or the CDJ roughly corresponds to this apical constriction or the minor diameter. This is the point where the instrumentation, irrigation and obturation should end. So the distance from the coronal reference point, in case of an incisor, it is the incisal tip, to the point of apical constriction. That is roughly 0.5 to 1 millimeter. You are not able to see the inside of the tooth. So what you can assess is from the radiographic length, usually it is 0.5 to 1 mm short. That is where the everything should end. That is the working length for the tool. Of course, there are certain methods for determining the same. There are different radiographical methods and non-radiographical methods too. I'm not going into the details. So mostly what we do is we take a radiograph and along with the radiographic method, you use an electronic apex locator. So an electronic apex locator is a device. Actually here what you do is there is a lip clip and a file clip is there. So you are completing a circuit. So a lip clip is attached to the patient's lip and the file clip will be having an endodontic instrument in it. So through the access you are going to the apex, and once you just cross the apical foramen or when you touch the periodontal tissues, what happens? The resistance, electrical resistances are constant between the oral mucosa and the periodontal tissues. So suddenly there will be a signal in the device, usually an audio signal that actually tells you that you have reached the apex or you have just reached the periodontal tissues. Need not be the apex always. It can be due to perforation as well. But if you are contacting a periodontal tissue, then the circuit gets completed and a signal will be generated. That is how you assess the working length using an electronic apex locator. So what we usually do is we use a radiograph method along with an electronic apex locators. So these are the usual instruments that we use to clean and shape the root canal system. You can see K files, H files, reamers. These are all hand instruments. What you are seeing in the you're seeing down is what you are seeing is an endomotor. So this is a recent advent. Actually, the cleaning and shaping part is the believe me, it takes too much time when you're using a hand instrument alone. It takes too much time and actually judges your patience. So with the advent of this endomotor, the time has reduced to very much. Okay. So here we are using rotary files along with the endomotor so that the work has become less tedious, I would say. Okay. So here there are different systems of endodontic files, rotary files that are available. So using that, you can clean and shape the root canals. Next, see how this is how there are different methods by which you can instrument. So I will just brief it out. The most common method that you use is a step back means you determine the working length and you start from the apex to the crown. You instrument the apex first, then the middle third first and the crown. So that is the first picture you can see. That is a sequence of instrumentation. Step back, you usually use hand instruments. I'm not going into the details. Next is the hand and rotary instruments, that is step down. So when you're using hand and rotary instruments, you usually go with the second method, that is step down. You enlarge the coronal part first, then the middle part, and lastly the apical third. So that is step down method. Next is a hybrid method. Here you use both hand instruments and rotary instruments. So initially you flare the coronal part, then you instrument the apical part, and then you merge the coronal and apical part by instrumenting the middle part. So that is the hybrid method of instrumentation. Now it is cleaning and shaping. The whole thing was earlier called as biomechanical preparation. So now it is called cleaning and shaping. So the cleaning part, shaping of course you can do with the files. The cleaning part is largely dependent on irrigation. See, the irrigation is very important. Actually, I would say that it is even more important than shaping the root canal, I would say. Of course, shaping is needed, but cleaning, you can only assess the apex through the access opening that you have made. See, the root canal is a very complex, it is a very complex tissue. It has got lot of intricacies in it. It has got lot of accessory canals. It has got a lot of lateral canals, accessory canals, isthmuses, that is connections in between the canals, especially if you are dealing with molar teeth and all. Even in anterior teeth, there will be isthmuses. So you are just having this access from the coronal portion to the apical portion. You are not able to reach all that area using your file alone. So in that areas, what will reach is your irrigant. So copious amount of root canal irrigation is a must and mandatory for a successful root canal treatment. So one is to remove the debris, then you dissolve and flush out the organic, inorganic remnants, bacteria, then the smear layer. So what is smear layer? Once you instrument any tooth surface, if it is the crown or the radicular portion, there will be a cutting debris that is strongly adhering to the dentine. That is called the smear layer. So it contains a lot of microorganisms in it and also other debris also. So it is best that you remove the smear layer in endodontic therapy. Okay, there are different school of thoughts, but in my opinion, it is best to remove the smear layer so that you can be sure that you are not leaving any bacterial, I mean microorganisms behind as such. So to remove the smear layer, you have to use a good root canal irrigant. These are the common root canal irrigants. One is sodium hypochlorite. It is the most common root canal irrigant that is used is sodium hypochlorite. What you use is usually 2.5 to 5.25% is used. Next is EDTA. It has got a chelating action as well. 17% EDTA solution. Then chlorhexidine. 2% chlorhexidine is another important root canal irrigant. There are several other irrigants, even saline. Saline is what you use commonly. What I use is I irrigate the canal, use saline. I put the hypochlorite in the pulp chamber and pump the solution inside using the files. That is, that is better in my opinion. In my clinical experience, I felt that the amount of flare-ups or the post-operative pain tends to get reduced when I use like that. I copiously irrigate with saline. I put hypochlorite in the pulp chamber and pump the solution inside using a file. So that is best and a better method, I felt. So an EDT and chlorhexidine, even local anesthetic you can use as an irrigant. And another thing is with endodontic irrigation, another thing that you have to use is you should never force the irrigant inside. You should never force the irrigant inside. That is another thing. The irrigant, there should be sufficient space available for backflow of the irrigant. The irrigant should never extrude out. And next is intracanal medicaments. I already talked about this. Intracanal medicaments is necessary in most of the cases to deliver some form of antimicrobial agent. It should remain inside the canal for some time. What you usually give is a calcium hydroxide. In certain cases, lidomix. Lidomix is not in practice nowadays. In in our place, lidomix. It is a corticosteroid combination, corticosteroid antibiotic combination, lidomix. So you can cut the canals using an intracanal medicament. You can give a seal and ask the patient to come after usually 7 days. Calcium hydroxide if you are giving, the most common medicament that you give is calcium hydroxide, and it is best to recall the patient after 7 days. 7 days at least, the calcium hydroxide should present inside the root canal. So once you clean and shape the root canal, this is how it looked like. You have shaped and you have de-roofed so that your instrument is very free to go to the apical third, and you have created smooth tapering walls. So this is how an instrumented, cleaned and shaped canal will look like. Final step is the obturation. See, this is how you fill the canal. So here what you are doing is you are sealing off the, you have disinfected. It is never possible to completely sterilize the root canal. See, however, whatever method that you're using, some microorganisms will remain inside. So what you're doing is we are sealing the remaining things, microorganisms and their products inside the canal. You are entombing the remaining microorganisms within the canal so that they are deprived of its nutrients and they will become, and they will get destroyed in time. So that is what we use. So the most important thing is after we do the cleaning and shaping, we have to seal all the portals of entry and exit. All the portals of entry and exit, lateral, apical and coronal. Every portals of entry and exit you have to completely seal off. That is what we do in obturation. Okay, we are filling it with an inert material. This is what we do. So, and what is created is a fluid tight seal. So earlier it was called a hermetic seal. Now it is called a fluid tight seal. There should not be any type of percolation from within the canal or from the periapical tissues into the canal. So that is what you do in obturation. So when can we obturate? So when can we obturate? One is the canal should be dry. So that is the first and foremost thing. So there may be a periapical pathology, but as I told you earlier, we need not wait for the pathology or the periapical radiolucency to subside for obturation to occur. You can obturate the canal once the canal is completely dry. Completely dry and odor-free, patient is completely asymptomatic, the pain, swelling or tenderness to percussion, everything has subsided, and there is no patent sinus tract with any active discharge. Okay, you do not wait for the sinus tract to completely resolve. If there is no active discharge and the tooth is completely asymptomatic and dry, you can obturate. Okay, that is when you can obturate the canals. And the apical extent, where should the obturation end? It should end at the minor constriction. That is the minor diameter, or the what is it? The apical constriction, usually 0.5 to 1 mm short of the apex. That is where the obturation should end. Nadira.
Thank you, ma'am. What are the materials and devices used in a root canal treatment?
See, I have already discussed the materials for root canal preparation, the files, the apex locators, and the different diagnostic materials, and all I have discussed. Now, I think what is remaining is the obturating materials. So, obturating materials, they can be classified into plastic, solid, cements, and paste. There are several materials that are available. I will just discuss the most important material, which is gutta percha. Okay, gutta percha is actually a form of rubber. It's a trans polyisoprene. What you get is it is a dried coagulated extract of certain trees called Palacium gutta. Okay, so it is a trans isomer of polyisoprene, and it exists in alpha forms and beta forms. So this is how a gutta percha look like. So I think you have noticed the color coding. It was there in the earlier when I showed the files. Also, you could have seen the same color codings. It's color coded from white, yellow, red, blue, green, and black. There are three other colors also, purple, pink, gray, and purple. So they are. This is a standardization. This is a standardization that we use, and it determines the size of the gutta percha cones. Even for files, there is a similar standardization, and you can see gradations in it, so that you can assess the working length from the gradations that are present. If the working length that you have determined is 16 millimeter, then you measure the 16 millimeter in the gutta percha using the gradation, and you can be sure that the cone fits correct 16 millimeter inside the canal. So that is what the gradations are for. And here what you are seeing is the gutta percha pellets. These are pellets which are used for other methods like thermoplast. There is another method called thermoplasticized obturation. Here you are actually softening the gutta percha and injecting the gutta percha inside rather than using the cones. So for that we use the gutta percha pellets. And along with that, so that is the core filling material, the main material. And the gutta percha, it doesn't form any bond with each other. So you have to fill the voids in between. So what you use is sealers. So these are the sealers that are used. They are used to fill the voids and irregularities, and also to fill the accessory and lateral canals. What you are usually using is zinc oxide eugenol. Then different techniques are there. I'm not going into the details. The most important technique is a cold lateral compaction. Cold lateral compaction means you place a master cone, the first cone that fits till the working length, the cleaned and shaped canal working length. That is the master cone. Once you place the master cone using this root canal spreader, you are creating space for the accessory cones. Here you can see. And you completely fill the canals till no more space is left for the spreader to go inside. That is called the lateral compaction of gutta percha. This is vertical compaction. Here you can see is a system B device. Here what you use is you put a master cone here, and you soften that cone and sear off a point of the cone. The apical 2 to 3 millimeter cone will remain. Apical 4 to 5 millimeter, 3 millimeter to 4 millimeter, the cone will remain, and the rest you are searing off with a heated instrument, and you are plugging the softened gutta percha so that the gutta percha gets softened and goes and fills the lateral and accessory canals as well. This is called the warm vertical compaction. And this is another method, that is, I told you the pellets that I use. Here it is like a syringe, gun-like device. Here you heat the gutta percha pellets and you inject it inside the canal. It is usually used for backfilling. Once you do the warm vertical compaction, the rest of the space that is present the coronal part, you can fill it by using the thermoplasticized obturation technique. And the carrier based obturation. Here the carriers are available, plastic, steel carriers are available. You can soften and it is coated with gutta percha. So you can soften the gutta percha that is present in the carrier. You insert it. Here you can see the stoppers that are present that will help you set the working length. You insert it to the correct working length and you sear off the carrier so that the gutta percha is fitting to the correct working length. So this is about the different materials that you use. Adira.
Thank you, ma'am. When filling material into the root canal with gutta percha stick, if gutta percha stick breaks inside the root canal, what can be done?
Actually, breakage of gutta percha inside the root canal within the working length is not a problem because gutta percha is a very pliable material. So what you can use is, if it is within the working length, you can use a spreader to adapt it and you can place the next cone, or you can just soften it and adapt. So that is not a big problem. But if the gutta percha is breaking off beyond the apex, if it is going and breaking off beyond the apex, it is going to the periapex, then there is an issue. So then you have to go for a follow up. You have to follow up the patient. The patient is developing any irritation, especially in case of a periapical pathology and all, there may be issues. So in such cases, maybe you have to go for a surgical retrieval of the gutta percha. But if it is just going beyond the apex and you are getting access from the canal itself, try to retrieve it from there. So breaking inside the canal within the working length is not a problem.
Thank you, ma'am. What are the precautions to be taken during an RCT?
Okay, I would say precautions, I will say they're actually challenges. So, first and foremost, is we have to ask for a good case history of the patient. Like the patient is having any other systemic problems, you have to go for a physician consultation, especially if you are dealing with a pregnant patient and all. You never do you do the elective procedures in the second trimester itself. If at all possible, you postpone the treatment in the third trimester or the first trimester. So that is one thing. I'm just telling you an example. And another thing is that if the patient is having an allergy to a local anesthetic agent, so you have to ask for a careful allergy history. If the patient is giving a history of allergy, it is always better to take an allergy test and do the treatment. That is one thing. Okay, that is one another precaution. And always, if the patient is complaining of any systemic disease, go for a physician consultation. So let them decide what to do. I mean, what all alterations in medicaments that the patient is already taking, especially if the cardiovascular disease is there and the patient is taking antiplatelet drugs, then sometimes they will ask you to stop the drugs 5 days prior to the treatment. So sometimes they may be needing antibiotic prophylaxis. So all this should be carefully analyzed. So that is one precaution that you have to take from the case history. Another thing is one challenge is the hot tooth. So this is a very unfortunate situation. One of the we will not be knowing what to do in such a case because the anesthetic will not will not be effective. We are not able to touch the patient. Patient will just jump out. So it is such case means it is a case of an acute, irreversible symptomatic irreversible pulpitis. So the patient is in so much agony and pain that he's we are not able to deliver any treatment. So this thing is that why it is like that. The local anesthetic is not able to act because of the very low pH in the inflamed tissue. And another thing is, as you know, the lidocaine is acting mainly by blocking the sodium channels. So in such cases, it is found that there are certain sodium channels like tetrodotoxin resistant sodium channels, they are called. They are, yeah, they will not respond to their local anesthesia. So, and there is psychological factors. Then another thing is reduced stimulation threshold of nociceptors because of the inflammatory mediators. There will be immense amount of inflammatory mediators present. So that will cause a lower threshold of your nociceptors, that is adult and C fibers. So they will get stimulated at a very small threshold itself. So in such cases, we have to consider other supplemental injection techniques in addition to what you have done, that is the infraalveolar or the supraperiosteal. We have to go for intraosseous or intraligamentary or intrapulpal. I will say from my experience, intrapulpal is the best. If you administer 2 drops of anesthetic solution inside the chamber, the patient is going to be getting immediate relief. But it is a very painful injection. The moment you inject, it will be like the patient will be in so much of agony, but even in 1 to 2 seconds, the pain will subside. That is the importance of intrapulpal anesthesia. Next is flare up. So this is another unfortunate situation. Like the patient has come to you with a discolored tooth. It has not got any other problems. You took a radiograph and you see a large periapical radiolucency. You instrument and irrigate. There was no pain, nothing. The patient is going to home and then calling of that, what have you done to my tooth? Now I am in so much pain. This is called an endodontic flare up. Okay, so it is an intra-appointment emergency, you can say. Once you started the treatment, the patient is getting pain. So it can occur with even the best of therapy. It can occur even with the best of therapy. It is nothing, it is not because of anything that you have done mostly, but in some cases, what is present is you have delivered some improper treatment in the way that you have injected the solution, or not hypochlorite, your irrigants have gone beyond the apex, or the instrumentation have forced some debris beyond the apex. So that is one reason. And another thing is the alteration in the local adaptation. See, the microorganisms, they were sitting comfortably all this time. You just open now, and most of them in such cases, the microorganisms will be strict anaerobes. You have opened and you have changed the environment for them, and you have introduced so many disinfectants, medicaments, irrigants, everything is coming onto their head, from the access opening. So what will happen? So it will create a increase in, they will get reactivated. The organisms that were dormant till that time, they will get reactivated by what you have done. So that is one major reason for an endodontic flare up. So you have to do a symptomatic management. You have to recall the patient. You have to reassure the patient that there is nothing wrong. It is just because of all this. You have to be calm. You have to give analgesics, then maybe anti-inflammatories. You have to reopen the canal, do copious irrigation, make sure that you are getting the correct working length and you are not going beyond the working length. Never go beyond the working length. You give an intracanal medicament, usually calcium hydroxide, and in 1 or 2 days, the patient will become okay. That is an endodontic flare up. See, I have already discussed one is the microbial reasons for endodontic flare up, then the mechanical, that is pushing out of debris, and the chemical reasons, the use of irrigants, certain irrigants. Then calcified canals. This is another unfortunate situations where you're not able to see the canal at all. You are not able to see the canal at all. So it is a very common occurrence, unfortunately. So you have to go for use of chelating agents, then use of magnifications, and then there are certain other methods. And if at all it is not at all possible to negotiate, you may have to consider surgical therapy. It may be episectomy. Then procedural loss. This is in your hands. See, one is hypochlorite accident. See, very unfortunate situation. Here, this occurs either due to inadvertent injection of hypochlorite. Like you thought that it is local anesthetic, and instead of local anesthetic, you injected the hypochlorite, because both look essentially the same. This is totally preventable. See, whenever you are loading the anesthetic, you do it by yourself. Don't tell the assistant to load the anesthetic for you. You load the anesthetic by yourself. Otherwise, you may end up in such a situation. That is sodium hypochlorite accident. Otherwise, another reason is you have extruded the hypochlorite beyond the apex. Beyond the apex, the hypochlorite solution has gone beyond and cause an irritation. So there will be immense ballooning of the tissues, necrosis, very, very extremely painful situation. And embarrassing situation for the endodontist. So immediate application ice packs, dilute the area with a lot of saline infiltration. Try to dilute the solution with saline infiltration. Give analgesics, anti-inflammatories, antihistamines, and after 24 hours, we can ask them to put warm compressions. Then missed canals. You must be missed canals. Always go for different angled radiographs so that you will not end up in a missed canal, because your RCT is going to fail. The patient will come back to you with pain if you have missed a canal, because vital tissue will still be remaining in that. Then perforations. So this is another condition, whether you have deviated from the canal and the instrument has gone to another direction. So it can be apical, mid-root, or cervical root perforations. So that is another unfortunate situation. So you have to be very careful while instrumenting the canal. Then ledge formation. This is usually used of loss of working length. Either you have determined the working length shortly, or you have just ignored the working length in between. You didn't try to negotiate a curvature, or you have skipped instruments in between. See, the skipped instrument should always be used in sequence. If you have skipped instruments and went on to a large instrument, you will end up in a ledge. A ledge means a platform you have created inside the canal. After that, you will not be able to instrument the portion which is apical to that. So that is called a ledge. So what happens? The nidus will still remain there and the infection will not subside. Then overfilling and underfilling. See, both are equally. Actually, the Washington study was done. In that, the underfilling was the major reason for most of the root canal failures. Here you can see a large periapical lesion in the apical region of a mandibular second molar. See here, it is so short that the apical control zone, that is the apical nidus of the infection. The apical 2 to 3 millimeter is left untreated. That is why the lesion is not subsiding. So that is one of the reasons. Then overfilling, again, overfilling is equally detrimental. The patient will be getting recurrent pain, abscess, and the symptoms will not subside. Adira.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, could you brief us about the laser RCT?
Okay, lasers are used in endodontics for many purposes. Laser means the major actions of laser that we use in endodontics is photothermal and photomechanical effects. Photothermal and photomechanical effects are utilized now. We already discussed about laser Doppler flowmetry. The lasers are also used for amputating the pulp, that is for the actual pulp extirpation, then to refine the access slightly, then to selectively remove the calcifications in pulp chamber to locate the orifices. Another important thing is photoactivated disinfection. Here, what we use is diode lasers. It is very important. Photoactivated disinfection is a recent advent in irrigation of the root canal. Here, what we use is we use certain dyes, photosensitizer dyes are used, which actually respond to a particular wavelength of light. So we irradiate the dye solution inside the root canal with a particular laser or wavelength with a particular wavelength. And what happens is they will generate free radicals to destroy the microorganisms. It is found to be almost 99.99% effective, very, very effective, photoactivated disinfection. Then it can also be used for curing of resin-based sealers and to modify the dentinal walls so that the obturating material gets adapted better to the you know uh, to the walls, root canal walls. And the usual lasers that we use is diode laser, carbon dioxide, argon lasers, Nd:YAG, erbium, yttrium, aluminum, garnet. So actually lasers, these are the different uses of lasers.
Thank you, ma'am. Which is a better treatment among all in between option a laser assisted RCT and classical RCT?
See, in your question itself, it is given that it is laser assisted RCT. See, you cannot use the laser alone to complete a root canal treatment. You can only use it as an adjunct to the conventional root canal therapy. So, if you are going to use a laser, you have to plan everything accordingly. That is, you have to consider the safety of the personals, of the patient, and of course, you. So, everything should be there. Laser protection should be ensured for all. And another thing is when it is you have to be aware of the possible side effects of using the laser, especially the photothermal effects. If it is not in your control, you can you can end up in a lot of side effects. And another thing is you laser tends to travel in straight lines. Once you irrigate or irradiate the canals for disinfection, the laser will not go, the light will not go to the lateral and accessory canals to disinfect. You have to always use an irrigant along with the laser for that. So of course, it is beneficial in some aspect, but in our normal clinical setting, and of course, it is expensive. The patient will have to give that much for doing a laser assisted RCT. So, in my opinion, a good conventional RCT will suffice in most of the cases. And laser assisted RCT has got added advantages in it, but you cannot use a laser alone for a good RCT.
Thank you, ma'am. What are the guidelines to follow after RCT and how to prevent further damage?
See, after doing a root canal treatment, you have to ask the patient. So, the treatment is not just completed there. The patient will be relieved of pain, but the tooth has to remain functional. So, you have to ask the patient that you should not bite or chew anything hard on that area until you get a good post endodontic restoration. Why a post endodontic restoration? Because most cases the tooth will be already destroyed so much with the caries, and on top of that, you have done the access opening as well. So, the crown structure has so much weakened. So we have to reinforce the crown portion. And another thing is one major side effect, I will say side effect, one complication that can arise out if you have not given a good post-endodontic restoration is the possibility of a vertical root fracture. Okay, especially when you are during lateral condensation and all. So this is the worst thing that can occur to an endodontically treated tooth. If the tooth is getting a vertical root fracture, the only other possibility is to extract. It is hopeless prognosis. So always and always, you should not over instrument and weaken the tooth, and you have to give a post endodontic restoration as soon as possible after completion of the root canal therapy. So, and also good coronal seal is very important for the completion or success of the root canal therapy. So even when you have done the obturation very nicely, you have given the radicular and lateral seal, everything. Coronal portion is remaining like that. You just gave a temporary filling. Then what is the use? Again, percolation is getting inside, percolation through the coronal portion, and reinfection can occur. So you have to give a post-endodontic restorations. Then here, this is a case that was done by me. See here, I have given a fiber reinforced composite post for this case, and this is the post-operative view. So that this tooth is the patient is relieved of pain once you did the RCT. But can we send off the patient like this? No, we have to give a good post-endodontic restoration. Then only the treatment is completed.
Thank you, ma'am. What are the side effects of RCT, ma'am?
Actually, there are no non-side effects of RCT. The problem is complications can arise out of other things like, if the patient is allergic to local anesthetics, you didn't know that and you have administered local anesthetics, it can end up in a difficult situation. And another thing is a cardiovascular patient, a patient who has had a history of infective endocarditis, or a patient with congenital cyanotic heart disease. If you have not, and then if you have not taken the good antibiotic prophylaxis, it can end up in a very unfortunate situation. And again, the patient is having some bleeding disorders. You have not taken the hematologic examination and you have not done a physician consultation. You are going to end up in a very unfortunate situation. And these are the complications. As such, the doing an RCT will not cause you any side effects. But these, as I have already discussed, there are some challenges and there are some unfortunate situations that can arise out of it can be either procedural error, or it can be due to the condition of the patient or the response of the patient to the particular medication. All this can cause some unfortunate events, but as such there are no non side effects for doing a root canal treatment.
Thank you, ma'am. What can be done if a tooth is reinfected after an RCT?
See, after doing an RCT, when can we say that the root canal treatment is a success? So, if the tooth is remaining asymptomatic, and if the patient is able to, you have given a good post-endodontic restoration, and you have been able to function equally, been able to chew equally with both sides, healthy periodontium, and you need not wait. No, you have to compare with the pre-operative radiograph. You have to take follow-up radiographs and see. So, if you are seeing that there was a periapical pathology, so either the lesion is not increasing in size or actually it is decreasing in size, then you can definitely tell that. And if it is not increasing or it is staying the same, but the patient is completely asymptomatic, then you may say that the treatment might be a success. And after 6 months to 1 year, 6 months to 1 year, if you take the follow-up radiograph, you may see that the lesion has shrunken in size so much. So in within three months itself, if the patient is completely asymptomatic and there is no active discharge, the sinus tract has healed, and the patient is able to function normally with equally with both sides. So in that case, we can say that the RCT is a success. But in certain cases, even if you do deliver the best endodontic treatment, there are certain lesions that don't resolve. That is called a refractory endodontic lesions, refractory endodontic treatment. That is refractory or non-resolving to your treatment. It may be due to the presence of certain types of bacteria that are present, or it may be due to the, as I told earlier, the procedural error or iatrogenic error in your part, in the part of the endodontist. So if such a case occur, there will be return of symptoms or there will be persistence of symptoms. In such case, you have to go for a endodontic retreatment. Endodontic retreatment may be needed. So
Thank you,
if you
ma'am.
have, yeah, if you have to go for an endodontic retreatment, what all you can do is you have to remove the coronal part, the coronal portion, the crown which is present. You have to regain the axis. You have to remove the canal destructions. You have to establish the patency. Again, you do the steps as before: thorough cleaning, shaping, and obturation.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, before moving forward, I request all the attendees to post their doubts in the comment box. Ma'am, the next question is, a participant wants to know if the post-root canal pain management.
Yeah, post root canal pain management, it is best that the patient take an analgesic before wearing off of the anesthesia. Like usually it will be around 1 to 2 hours the patient will remain anesthetized. So it is better that before half an hour, before the anesthesia wears off, like mostly around 1.5 hours after the treatment. It is best that the patient take an analgesic. And mostly what we give is NSAIDs. If the patient is not having any other, complications like bleeding disorders or anything, what you prescribe is usually NSAIDs. You can ask them to take an NSAID. And antibiotics as such is not indicated except in certain cases when the patient is having some systemic conditions along with it. Like if the patient is showing symptoms like fever, then cellulitis, then lymphadenopathy is present, then you may prescribe an antibiotic as well.
Thank you, ma'am. In case of an RCT failure, what steps should be taken to prevent the loss of the teeth?
In case of an RCT failure, yeah, in case of an RCT failure, as I told earlier, you have to assess what is the cause of the failure. So, if you see that the lesion is persisting, then that demands a retreatment. Then you have to do a retreatment. And if the after doing the retreatment, you have disassembled the crown, and in the course of disassembling, you may end up in losing the remaining crown structure as well. When you remove the crown and all. So in that case, you may have to consider placement of a post also, maybe in the next time if the patient may have to have a post also. You have to cement a post inside, you have to rebuild the crown, and you have to give another good post endodontic restoration for the tooth to remain function after doing the non-surgical endodontic retreatment.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, how do we know how deep we have to insert the file during removal of an infected pulp?
Removal of an infected pulp. Yeah, that is the importance of working length. You have to assess the working length. That is the initial stage before you don't instrument the canal before knowing the working length. Once you do the access opening, you just can insert, you from the radiograph, initial radiograph, you will get an initial picture about the length. Usually it is for central incisor around 21 to 22 millimeter, maxillary central incisor. And if you are having a good intraoral periapical radiograph, you can measure that on the radiograph, on the rough length of the tooth. And you can insert the rough length of the tooth. You can transfer it to a file. You can adjust the stopper like that. You can insert the file inside and check the patency whether you are able to reach till the apex. It largely depends on your digital tactile sense as well. After that, you should not instrument the canal. You should instrument the canal only after you have determined the working length. So next step is you put the file inside to the rough working length that you have transferred from the radiograph to the file. You take an radiograph with the file inside and you determine the working length. Usually, as I told earlier, it is 0.5 to 1 mm short of the radiographic length. And that is the length that you should set in the file. And from there, you can extirpate the pulp.
Thank you, ma'am. Is root canal a better option when compared with extraction when it comes to abscess below the tooth?
Of course, root canal treatment is the best option. That is beyond doubts. Extraction is the last resort. Only if you are not able to manage by any other method. If it is non-surgical, first you consider root canal treatment. If not, then you consider non-surgical retreatment of the root canal. Then you consider surgical retreatment of the root canal. That is by opening a flap. And even if the lesion is not resolving, even if it is not possible to get rid of the condition, we may consider extraction. So that is beyond doubts, root canal treatment is the best option. And as I told earlier, as I have already discussed in the rationale, periapical pathology, that is what the question is about. If you do a good root canal treatment, good irrigation, good shaping and cleaning, and good obturation, sealing of all the portals of entry and exit, a good coronal restoration, the periapical pathosis will resolve on its own, according to the fish concept.
Thank you, ma'am. That's all for the questions. I would like to thank you for accepting our invitation and conducting this webinar for us, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I'm so happy to be a part of this platform. So happy to be with part of so many enthusiastic, budding medicos and dental students, especially the medical students who have shown so much interest in knowing something, they are not usually heard of. And that is a good initiative on your part, I will say. And please doing such programs, especially in such an era, I mean, in this period of pandemic, no, COVID-19 pandemic, when everything has went online. This is a good platform for you all for new things, for getting to know new things. Mm, okay, there is one question that has come. Ma'am, can, root canal treatment can last for a lifetime? See, when you are doing, see, a question just now came. See, how can I say that a root canal treatment can last for a lifetime? So, can you, especially the medicos, can you tell me if a patient is coming to you for an angioplasty, can you tell that, see, from now on you will live forever? Like that, can you give assurance like that? It is just like that in case of a root canal treatment also. See, everything is, interdependent. Even with the best of root canal therapy, if the post-endodontic restoration fails, then everything goes. If the patient is not at all, compliant with your instructions, the tooth can get fractured over time. So you cannot give a assurance like that whether it will last for a lifetime. But the success rate is around 95 to 98%. And thank you all again. It
Thank
was a
you.
very nice session. I'm so happy to be a part of it. Keep doing such sessions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.